So the museum is open 4 days a week for a total of about 20 hours. And we just try to provide an account of history for the locals and anyone who wants to come and visit. We get lots of school groups that come, and we'll do special tours around the building for them, and we'll even take them on walking tours around town. So way back when, General William Palmer created the Denver and Rio Grande Railway, and he wanted to go from Denver to the Rio Grande. Well, he only made it to about Pueblo. But in about 1871, the railroad came through Castle Rock. And in 1875, they actually finally put in a depot, and that's what this building is. Now, this isn't the actual original location. It was moved about 6 blocks away from the railroad tracks by a couple who bought the building for $25, but they had to pay to move it here and buy the land and do all that. But we're very thankful they did. And luckily, they restored the building and turned it into a home for a while, rented it out to people and businesses for about 20 years. And then the Castle Rock Historical Society bought it in 1996, and in 1997, we opened it as a museum.
Well, I think history gives you kind of a sense of community, appreciation for all the work that people did in the past to create this community. When you think about Castle Rock, it's kind of like just typifies the grit that people had in the Old West to come out here when there was nothing, and in 10 or 20 years they would establish a town with churches and schools and newspapers, town government. I mean, it's just kind of amazing, and I think we can learn from them, you know, what's possible for ourselves.
I guess I can give an example of, I can give a lot of examples, but my wife, we live here, and she loves to go to the ocean. And she can sit next to the ocean and just sit there and listen to it. And she could turn on the television, and she could get pictures of the ocean, and she could get the sounds, but it's not the same. And so it's the same thing about a museum.
Well, a brick and mortar museum, we can constantly change it. If you have a book with pictures in it, you know, that's static until you come out with a new book. I think it's important to actually see the artifacts. And you know, one thing that's been very prominent in museums is the hands-on approach, especially for kids. Now, of course, most museums, ourselves included, have rules about that. You know, don't touch, don't touch. We've got signs here and there, please do not touch the artifacts. But there are a few that we let them touch. And those are the ones that they tend to love the most. Of course, we let them ring the bell. We let them open the cash register. I think that's the important aspect of a brick and mortar museum.
I see a brick and mortar building as almost as a sacred space, a place where people can come together and touch artifacts and see them and kind of interact with them on a whole different level than we can perhaps online or in a book. But when we come as humans to a brick and mortar place and we find ourselves in the same space with people who also have stories about the places and the artifacts that we're reminiscing about, I think it takes it to a whole nother level.
I think history is important because it tells us where we came from. People who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Sometimes I think we forget about the power of history, and I think we as a people forget that there are great lessons in history, and if we really learn from them, that can help us move forward. But if we forgot all of history, that kind of goes back to my philosophy that we are the stories. In our being, we are the stories. And if we don't know who we are, what we came from, we don't know how to move forward as successfully as perhaps we could have. We don't know how we celebrate. We don't know what kind of trauma we have suffered and how we conquered that. So I think if we forget all of history, we forget ourselves, and therefore we don't know ourselves.
So it is hard to keep honoring our history and, you know, going forward with progress and moving into the future and things, because every town wants to grow and bring more people and things, and that kind of means sometimes the structure of the town, you know, doesn't give way to that. You just kind of have to decide what is the most important things. Like here in Castle Rock, we do have some buildings that are landmarked, and so they cannot be torn down or changed or anything, and so that we know that that's protected. There's other buildings that have history in them, but we're not sure, you know, if they have to stay forever, or should we let the town, you know, tear them down or something to put in something more modern that will adapt for another 50, 100 years.
In order for us to accept that we are moving to a new place, we have to be somewhat ceremonial about that. So we can accept that there is grief, but in grief, what we can do with that is grab on to that which matters. And those are the stories. And how do we do that? We do that by offering this thriving museum for our community to come and visit. We offer information through newsletters. We invite folks to come and be a part of us. Come be a member with us. And you will get the newsletter where we celebrate those stories from way back when. And so those are still a part of who we are. So that's how we move forward. We move forward cautiously, carefully, and by honoring the historians and the history and the stories that will always be present here.